welcome back. So here's a question. Did you ever hear the word Fleischmann's? Well, if you don't know what Fleischmann's means, if you've never heard it before, you'll know it after today. My name is Vin Dacquino. Our guests are Bob Meyer and Kirk Moldoff. Gentlemen, what and where is Fleischmann's? Talk to me, Bob.
All right. Well, Fleischmann's is a town up in the Catskills. Mm-hmm. It was a plant in factory in Peekskill, and it was also a supporter of baseball. Now, what we're
baseball
doing,
is your thing.
Yeah.
You are the baseball historian.
So the Peekskill Museum, in conjunction with two companies that now own some of the Fleischmann's brands, A.B. Morey and Sazerac Company, are putting on a 2-day event in Peekskill coming up September 21st and 22nd. On the 21st, we're going to have an exhibit of Fleischmann's related memorabilia and many of photographs of the site at the Peekskill Museum at 124 Union Avenue in Peekskill.
124 Union Avenue, Peekskill.
And that begins at 1 o'clock on Saturday, the 21st of September. I'll be giving a short presentation on the Fleischmann's family because they were fascinatingly interesting people and their link to baseball. And then on Sunday, we have a special event with 4 vintage baseball teams coming down from 2 from the Catskills, and 1 from Connecticut and 1 from Rhode Island to play 4 games under the rules of from the 1860s through the 1890s at Peekskill Stadium on Louisa Street from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
These are not young rookie players.
These are men in their 20s and 30s primarily that are playing by old-fashioned rules, wearing old-fashioned uniforms. The 1860s, they're still pitching underhand. Foul ball you can catch on a bounce. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different rules in place at that time. So I'm going to cover the family and the baseball, and Kirk is going to cover the connection to Peekskill.
Wow. Now, you actually brought a jersey.
Yes, this would be a jersey from around the 1930s. Of a Fleischmann team out of Cincinnati, Ohio.
So by the 1930s, baseball was already old. I mean, when did they start playing?
100 years old already by then.
Oh, my God.
But so I first got introduced to Fleischmann's through this because my father was a martini drinker. And taught me how to make martinis, although I never developed a taste for them. But then in around 2007, a friend of mine had written an article about a baseball team from the Catskills called the Mountain Athletic Club, and it was in a town called Griffin Corners, which ultimately today is known as Fleischmann's. This was founded by children of Charles Fleischmann, the founder of the company. Wow. And they loved baseball, and they developed a very semi-professional team, and many of the players went on to play in the major leagues.
Wow. It's funny because Fleischmann's is not new to me, because my publisher for Sybil Ludington, The Call to Arms, is actually in Fleischmann's, the Purple Mountain Press.
Right.
So I was introduced all the way back in like 2000, maybe 1998, and I was going to Fleischmann's. What an interesting little town. I mean, it's almost like going back in time. Right. So they have a ball field.
Well, and they also, what happened was Charles Fleischmann, the founder of the company, which I guess we're not going to go into detail on the founding, but he was ill, and his doctors recommended that he go somewhere out of Cincinnati for some fresh air. And his sister Josephine had a house in Griffin Corners, so he purchased land there, and they ended up building 6 more summer houses or mini mansions.
What better air than the purple mountains of Catskill? That is beautiful area, and the air is beautiful and clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so interesting. So they were back there playing baseball
Right.
and doing their thing. And now the Fleischmann family.
Yes, Charles came over to the United States in the 1860s for his sister's wedding. And while he was here, he noticed that the bread was rather inferior to what they had in Austria-Hungary. So he actually came back in 1867 and emigrated to this country and started a little distillery with his brother Maximilian on Long Island.
So the connection between
yeah.
bread and liquor is yeast.
Yes, it's I guess the alcohol is a byproduct of the process, and Kirk will probably go into a little more with that. But Charles ended up going, and Max ended up going up to Cincinnati and started a company with a guy named James Gaff, and they called it Gaff Fleischmann's Company, where they developed yeast. And in 1876, they put up an exhibit, which we have a nice photo of their exhibit at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. And there were about 10 million people came, and their business just took off after that. Now, ultimately, Charles became what you would call a multi-billionaire in today's dollars. And when he passed away in 1897, his son Julius took over. Now, Julius is actually pictured in this baseball team we have behind us, but Julius expanded the company exponentially and ultimately decided he had to be closer to the New York and New England markets, and decided to build a plant in Peekskill because of the accessibility through the Hudson River and the New York Central Railroad. So,
wow.
Now,
Kirk,
yes, yes.
Talk to us.
Well, it's an amazing story. I'm an industrial archaeologist. That's my passion.
Wow.
And I collect Peekskill stoves, and the industry that created Peekskill was the cast iron stove and plow industry. At one point, they made 200,000 of these a year.
Holy cow.
But that business was fading away by the turn of the century. So along come Maximilian and Charles Fleischmann, who had come to the country, as Bob said, from Europe, noting that we have really inferior bread, nothing like they had back in Vienna. So they have this idea at the exposition in Philadelphia to create a Vienna model bakery.
Wow. Look at the size of that thing.
It was huge. It's a restaurant, it's a demonstration bakery where people could see how to use their yeast, how to make bread, how to make rolls, and then they would serve them too. Wow. Hugely popular. So they started establishing these around the country, one in New York on 10th Street, and demonstrating to people how to use their product, which becomes fabulously popular because it was unlike bread, just never tasted the same after that, nor anything made with yeast. Wow. So to fulfill the capacity for the need for yeast, they created the world's largest yeast factory. They broke ground in 1899 at Charles Point in Peekskill, the point being named for Charles Fleischmann. And at its peak during World War II, employed 1,000 locals from Peekskill and the surrounding area.
And no trace of it today?
Today, all that's left is at the Factoria complex, the gin building, and the atrium are 2 of the vinegar producing buildings.
Really?
Out of what had been a 125 building complex, 1.5 million feet under roof, under cover. They had a granary that stored up to 330,000 bushels of corn and wheat, and their own power plants burning 5,000 tons of coal a month. They needed 5,000 bushels a day to produce all of the spirits, the whiskey, the gin that were being produced there, and then molasses that came in years later by ship, but that's the substrate for making yeast. So they broke ground, and within a year had built this plant, started producing whiskey and gin, later added a vinegar plant next to it, which became very important in World War I because, oh, sorry about that.
Hold that up again for a second.
A little longer.
There you go.
And this is a shot of people in one of the whiskey houses that were located along the railroad tracks. There were just tons of different buildings, laboratories, places for distilling the different products. And they moved on, as I said, to vinegar also. It was the largest yeast producing plant in the country, second largest for vinegar, because that was a product used in World War I to make munitions. It became very important. They also had one of the first fleets of trucks. You'd think about Amazon or
That's
UPS today. Serious looking truck. And the yeast at that point was delivered fresh. That's part of the reason they picked Charles Point. It's very close to a huge market of New York, had to be refrigerated, so they had their own fleet of trucks here and around the country at other plants to deliver the yeast. Again, so many people in Peekskill worked there. At one point, they were running around the clock. This is a photograph of the women working in the yeast packing area.
Wow.
Again,
About
running.
What year are we looking at?
Right now, we're looking in the 1950s.
Wow.
In 1929, they had actually merged with Standard Brands. J.P. Morgan facilitated that with Chase and Sanborn and a number of other products, Royal Gelatin, to become Standard Brands. But people still refer to it as Fleischmann's because as part of the complex, the Fleischmann's Distilling Corporation was separate. They had shuttered it during the Depression, but kept it. They produced alcohol for industrial purposes, but Standard Brands would produce newsletters, and these we've been publishing on Facebook lately, showing a lot of the local folks that work there. These ladies working in the whiskey bottling line.
Yeah, those women seem to have a lot of spirit.
Yeah, we also will be noting a lot of. I like that. Just caught that. I'm slow. There was a tragedy, though, on August 1st, 1918, the largest tragedy in the history of Peekskill, when 7 firefighters lost their lives.
Oh, wow.
There was a fire in one of the grain buildings, and all the water that had been poured on the fire expanded the grain and collapsed one of the walls, killing 7 firefighters. And every year, the Peekskill Fire Department honors their memory at Charles Point, where there's a memorial to the lost firefighters.
Wow.
But they recovered from that and continued, and also producing gin. Our event on Sunday, the 22nd, will take place in the gin house, as it was known. One of the
Will there be gin available?
There will be gin available.
Woo!
And it seemed not a family in Peekskill didn't have some in the basement. Everybody, would kind of bring it home in Skippy jars, things like that. And then one of the great honors that came upon the plant was during the war effort, because Fleischmann's had created a way, besides discovering that you could expose the yeast to ultraviolet light, produce more vitamin D, for the war effort, they had, in the 30s already, completed a process for drying yeast. So you have, now when you get yeast, you don't usually buy it wet, it's dried in cakes or in small packages. Yeah. And this was so important to the war effort that they won the first in 1943 and ended up getting 5 Navy Army E's for Excellence.
Wow.
They had 2,000 people at the ceremony. Here, Gus Fleischmann accepting the banner from the War Department. Everyone in the factory got a pin, all 1,000 workers, and a certificate. They also, during the war years, raised a lot of money for war bonds. The workers at Fleischmann sponsored 5 bombers to be built, during the war effort.
I had no idea they played such a major role.
Huge role,
Yeah.
And the number of products, Royal Gelatin, they established a factory there. People could tell when their, kids worked there in the summers. Governor Pataki worked there during the summers.
Really?
Yeah, most everybody in town did at one point. But, over the years, with the plant getting older, other companies like Nabisco buying it, eventually by 1977, the whole plant was shuttered, and they had moved manufacturing elsewhere.
Yeah, what a shame.
But it's a great memory in the history of the town. They had baseball
amazing.
teams, bowling leagues, you know.
History I didn't know anything about.
Yep.
Bob.
Yes. Two things. One, there was Charles. There was his sons, Julius and Maximilian. Maximilian didn't want anything to do with the business. He just traveled the world, big game hunting, collecting animals for zoos, until Julius died when he was 53 in a polo match in Miami.
Oh, wow.
Then Max took over the company for a very short time and then brought in J.P. Morgan to essentially merge it and become Standard Brands. But as Kirk mentioned, we are going to have a dinner at the Factoria, or Finn and Brew as it's known now, on Sunday night, the 22nd, after the ball games. But just briefly going back to the Fleischmann's Mountain Athletic Club, the baseball team that was started by Julius and Max, they had someone named Art Reynolds go around and recruit ball players for them. So they brought in college ball players and they brought in some professional ball players. So the team became quite a powerhouse that would run around to different towns on their private Pullman cars. The ball players would stay at the best hotels, all funded by the Fleischmann family, as well as they built a state-of-the-art baseball field up there. It had dugouts, it had attendance, they had everything that anyone would want if they
It's amazing
played
that they
ball.
would do it
Yeah.
that far. I mean, that's, I said,
Yeah.
I'm familiar with Fleischmann's.
Yeah.
That's like between here and nowhere. It's in the middle of beautiful scenery, but
Yeah, well,
there's no people up
They
there.
would just take their yachts up to Kingston, then take the train the rest of the way.
Wow.
But they managed to get, eventually, on their team over a course of about 10 years, 11 players that would go into the major leagues. In 1896,
Wow.
Honus Wagner, a
Oh
future
my
Hall
God,
of
Honus
Famer,
Wagner
played,
is big
played
time.
for them in 1896. Miller Huggins, who was also in the Hall of Fame and managed the Yankees when Babe Ruth
You
played.
have a Miller Huggins bat, right?
Yes, this is a Miller Huggins
there
bat.
it is.
Don't know if you can get that, but
Yeah, no, it's
this
pretty hard.
very possibly could have been a bat that Miller Huggins used.
Holy
So wherever they went, they lived large. They owned many yachts. They traveled the world. Max Jr. actually had 22 yachts during his lifetime.
22 yachts? Poor guy must have been struggling, huh?
Charles's sister married a doctor named Christian Holmes, and their son she bought him a company, a tuna product company that he ran very well, and then he bought an island off the coast of Hawaii where he would just entertain the Hollywood set and some presidents, Shirley Temple, John Wayne. They all came out to party on the island. And Charles's brothers were very successful as well. I mean, Charles became what they could call a multi-billionaire and passed that money on to his family. But his brother Louis was successful, and his son Raoul started and published New Yorker magazine.
Holy cow.
Then Julius's son, Julius Jr. or Junkie, developed Naples, Florida.
They called him Junkie, or he was a
They
junkie?
called him Junkie. I don't know what the purpose behind that. But he was also a big traveler, and they all gave their money away. They gave it to zoos, libraries, hospitals.
Wow.
They started a lot
Sure,
of
they were
things.
billionaires when
Yeah.
there were no billionaires.
True.
Today, billionaires common.
Well,
Wasn't common then.
No, Charles Fleischmann, when he established the Vienna Model Bakery on 10th Street and Broadway, one night saw somebody who didn't look like he was very up on his luck, looking in the window longingly at a loaf of bread. He offered it to him, he was still there working, and a cup of coffee, and then invited him to bring any friends in the same situation back.
Wow.
And within a week, the first bread line had formed. And you don't see that term
goodness,
before Fleischmann
yeah,
starts
bread
giving
line.
away bread 500 loaves a night and coffee, and he would actually have people from his company follow certain of these individuals back home to see if they had families and offer them aid.
Do you know, I can relate to that. When I was a kid, we had the Wonder Bread Bakery around the corner from us.
Yeah.
And the Wonder Bread Bakery had their ovens attached to the building, and they would open the doors and they'd bake their bread, and we as little kids would go there and they would throw us a loaf of this bread hot out of the oven. Eventually, we used to go with a stick of butter, and we used to break it open and put the butter and let the butter melt right on the hot bread. So, man, we appreciated that. So I could imagine those people in those days. What years are we talking about again?
Oh, you're talking 1880s,
Wow.
90s. You know, we have a photograph
Sure,
in
you had
the exhibit
immigrants
from
in there who
1908.
were
Yeah.
coming over.
Yeah.
Bread, a loaf of bread, it was $1 million, man.
And he had them do this at his bakeries all around the country. In fact, he had a facility in the Bronx to teach bakers how to use his product. Very forward thinking. Right now, you just assume a company might give you a cookbook with their recipes in it. He was the first to do that. So you could learn how to use the yeast product. Phenomenal advertising, yeast for everything.
Sounds like an amazing family.
It's an amazing family.
Really?
It really
Yeah.
is.
That was Lewis, yeah.
Yeah.
He was
So-
And even with the loaves of bread at Charles Point, there's a laboratory. There were several there. One was to check the quality of the yeast every day. So they would make small loaves of bread, see how they rose, bake them, and then the children in the neighborhood would come in and take them back home to their families,
I know
especially
the feeling well.
especially during the Depression.
Wow.
Yeah.
We used to be thrilled when they did the long loaves. Remember Wonder Bread used to have the long loaves?
Yep.
And we used to love the days that they made those because then we got the long loaves. So what can we expect to see at the museum? At the
Well,
event?
Kirk is putting together a wonderful exhibit of all of the photographs and images that we
Wow.
have from the Peekskill plant, and we'll have a few other odds and ends relating to the family, but that's the
Yeah, and tell me again, this is an all-day affair? This is going to start in the morning?
1 o'clock on Saturday the 21st
Okay.
through about 4 o'clock at the museum. The following day, we start around 10 o'clock with the baseball games and go till 4 o'clock. Then we go back to the old Fleischmann's facility at the Factoria for a dinner. People can actually get tickets for that dinner, although this might not make it on time. But so that's an all-day affair, and we expect I have a videographer.
And now the museum's a nonprofit.
Nonprofit.
Nonprofit. And as part of our
Yeah.
continuing mission to collect Peekskill history and
Yeah.
serve as an archive, a lot of the oral histories are missing
Yeah.
from this.
I mean, there's so many things about Peekskill
Yeah.
that people. I mean, Peekskill was part of the Underground Railroad.
True.
Abraham Lincoln actually stopped in Peekskill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Peekskill is a very interesting place.
Well, we'll have a videographer
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
Mike
Oh, wow.
Miner, to record people's memories, recollections of Fleischmann's, besides recording the events from that weekend. So we're very
Now,
excited
where
about it.
exactly is the museum again?
The museum is at 124 Union Avenue, and the baseball stadium is at Louisa Street. We have the mayor coming to throw out the first ball.
Oh,
We have one of the local celebrity singers, Doug Ferroni, who's going to sing the national anthem.
wow.
And Mike is going to do a bunch of interviews with Eric Newland, who's our announcer for the day, professional announcer and an actor. So we've got a lot of the bases covered, and now
I get it.
now the
Bases
key is
covered.
to get people out there to see us.
And that's Saturday.
That's Sunday, the
Sunday.
ball games.
Ball game is actually Sunday.
And
the
dinner
museum
is
events are Saturday.
Right.
Wow. And again, this is a nonprofit. They can get
Nonprofit.
tickets.
Yeah, we have Eventbrite. We're
You better
working
hurry
with
up
on-
because
yeah, I know.
those tickets are already selling
Yeah.
out.
And of course, we have the Fleischmann family book that was produced a couple of years ago at the museum, and we'll have that at all the parts of our events. If people want to pick that up,
Now, you have a photo behind you.
I do.
What is that?
That is the first photo that we have of the Mountain Athletic Club, which was in Griffin Corners.
Oh, look at these
and
guys.
ultimately,
They
when
look like Civil War soldiers.
we have Julius Fleischmann and his brother Max, who played on the team for several
Good-looking
years.
guys.
Julius became the mayor of Cincinnati at age 28 in 1900. He was the chairman of the Market National Bank and many other companies as well, while Max roamed around the country and shot tigers, you know, so.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so.
Max reminds me of Teddy Roosevelt, you know? Teddy
Absolutely.
Roosevelt, what a character
There's
that
a book
guy
written
was.
about Max Fleischmann
Yeah,
called
is that
Gentlemen
right?
of the Outdoors.
Wow,
It's a
I
great
have
book.
to see that because that
Yeah.
sounds terrific. Well, I got bad news for you guys. We're down to about our last 2 minutes.
Okay.
What have you not told us that you need to tell us?
Well, that the Peekskill Museum is always looking for volunteers and members.
And it's not only baseball.
It's not only
no.
baseball.
Very
We
little
have
baseball.
an amazing history from the Revolutionary War and the
Civil
Kitchewank Indians through the Civil War, through the industrial part of Peekskill's history in the 1800s.
I know you have some artifacts there from the hat factory too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's so many things. Now, when is the museum open?
We're generally open on Saturdays from 1 to 4 p.m. or by appointment if someone wants to call
Is there
us
an
or do
admission
a tour.
fee if they go?
There's we look for a donation of
Donations.
$5 for an adult and $1 for children.
Well, gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you,
I've
Ben.
said it a million times. If we don't teach the people of today about their yesterday, we're cheating them out of a piece of their tomorrow. We need to know about all those things that came before us. I've been at the museum. I did a talk at the museum. I'll be there again. Yep.
Yep.
I'm coming to do a talk on my new book, The Patriot Hero of the Hudson Valley. It's always a thrill to see what you guys are up to. Bob, I know you're like amazingly active in golf and in so many things. Keep on doing what you're doing. You keep on doing what you're doing. A pleasure to have you here today. I can't thank you enough for joining us. Thank you for being one-on-one with Bob and Kirk and me.